Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Mr. Furlong, how are you this afternoon?
I am very well, Ted. Thank you very much for having me on your show today.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I've been following your work for many a year, and you and I got to speak together at the Inside Practice event earlier this year. I gave the opening presentation, and you followed up with a keynote, and it almost seemed like we had collaborated because it was you kind of carried the theme, and I was glad that you didn't completely disagree with everything I just said, because people would listen to you before they did me.
Well, I don't know about that, but no, I think you're absolutely right. I think we're very much tuned in, I think, on the same wavelength. But but that's the good part, is that we're able to kind of offer complementary viewpoints on all the stuff that's going on out there,
which there's plenty of. There's no shortage of things to talk about in the legal sector these days. Well, let's get you introduced. I think most people probably know who you are. You've been around for quite a while. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you do it?
Cool. So I am a legal market or legal sector analyst, consultant, forecaster. Sometimes I say sideline reporter if I'm feeling particularly acerbic. What I mostly do is I write and I speak with law firms, legal organizations, anybody really in the legal sector. And what I try to do is to describe what I'm seeing in terms of the extraordinary changes taking place in the legal world, to anticipate what's coming our way in that regard, and then to make my recommendations. Look, this is what I really think we ought to be doing about this, what you in particular, in your whatever circumstance happens to be, should be doing about this, and just trying to give people a bit of a framework and some guidance in terms of where we can all go next on this. And I do all this from Ottawa, Canada, which is a very nice place to live, and so long as it's not any time between October and March. So
just half the year.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so going back to that Inside Practice event, so my opening presentation was regarding the innovation efforts in legal over the last 10 years and putting a little bit of structure around it. And my listeners have heard many times about the little analysis that I did with looking at the number of innovation resources that existed in 2014 and then again 10 years later in 2024. And there were 16 people on the ILTA roster, which doesn't have 100% coverage, but it's a fairly good data source. And then there were over 300 in 2024. Yeah. There's approaching 400 now. So massive 2,000% plus growth. And then I cited some additional numbers like the law department operations survey, where almost 2/3 of law firm clients said that they disagree or strongly disagree that their law firm partners are innovative, and really points to a pretty big disconnect. And I outlined a few reasons I think that gap exists, one of which is there's been a lot of innovation theater in legal. I had Michelle DiFestano on a couple episodes ago, and she wrote a great paper. God, that paper is probably 5-6 years old by now, where she went and interviewed 40 CNOs and, asked them about their remit. And the name of the paper was Roles, Holes, and Goals, the chief innovation officer role in law firms. And it was the number one remit was around marketing. It was they had cited the need for the firms to appear innovative within the marketplace. And and I had seen it. Obviously we sell into the KM and innovation space, and we had a bird's eye view into those functions. And then you followed up with a really interesting metaphor about immovable object that
Mhm.
has been big law and the billable hour and
Yeah.
the impending impact of this new transformation that's underway. Maybe you could just say a few words about the message that you were delivering that day, and so we can get a sense of that.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I was hoping to communicate to people is a part of it was to bring forward a little bit more sense of urgency. I think that for a lot of people in the legal sector, a lot of lawyers, and understandably, the take they have, or the way they kind of approach AI at the moment is mostly curiosity. It's like, huh, what's this? I wonder what this can do. Oh, wow, it's full of problems. And look at all these hallucinations. And maybe not taking it with quite the seriousness that I thought it required, and owning up to the fact that, as you say, right, we've got this, I think I used like a brick wall on a cannon to symbolize the two. And I said, look, I know that brick wall very well. I've been banging my head off it for the last 20, 25 years. The recalcitrance of the legal profession and of law firms is just extraordinary. And where so many other industries and professions have buckled under the pressure of outside forces, law has held firm. Now, the easiest thing in the world to say is this time is different. And, we've been wrong about these things before. But I look at what AI in particular is bringing. There's other forces at work here. There's other evolutions and developments taking place. You mentioned like the law department operations survey. 10 years ago, there was no such thing as law department operations. That legal ops was like this brand new concept. So we're seeing any number of other factors coming into play. And so part of my message was, I didn't want to call it like a wake up call necessarily, because people don't, no one likes getting woken up. That's why we have the snooze button. But it really was just to bring a sense of urgency to say, we are running out of time in order for us to make the adjustments to, yes, our business models as lawyers, but also how we perceive ourselves, how we present ourselves to the market, where we think our value is located. All of the ways in which we have traditionally defined that, I think, have maybe 5 years to run, maybe, if we're lucky. And so that really was kind of what I was hoping to communicate. Hopefully, some of it came across, but it's a message that I feel even more strongly about today than I did then.
Yeah, and I have a similar sentiment. So I've been in the space since 2008, so 17 years, and
Mm.
I've had the opportunity to work with 110 am law firms. That's when I stopped counting the number because it gets hard to count. Like
Yeah.
they merge, and okay, we had Drinker Biddle and Fagery Baker Daniels. Now they're Drinker Biddle, or they're Fagery Drinker. Does that count as three, or is that one? You lose track. So
Yeah.
I'm going to stay with 110, but more than half.
Hmm.
And in that time, I've gotten to know people and understand the industry pretty well. And I see a tremendous amount of complacency in the marketplace. It's
Yeah.
it's almost a tale of two extremes. I see firms that are really making moves and really investing, and the Clearys of the world, and the
Yeah.
Coolies, and you see them making big moves with the Springbok acquisition and
Yeah.
hiring of really talented personnel. And you see now Liz Grennan going to Simpson Thatcher, and it's
Yeah.
like I'm seeing some big, like, you didn't see things like this 5 years ago. So I'm really encouraged by that,
Hmm.
but I'm also seeing a big, it's almost like a bell-shaped curve.
Yeah.
You've got the firms on one tail that are really dialing it in. You've got the ostriches on the other
Hmm.
end that are sticking their head in the sand. And then you have the middle, which I think is where most of a big law sits.
Yeah.
And it's a smattering of, well, we've got some POCs in flight. We're defining a Gen AI strategy and policy, and we're doing some co-counsel Harvey
Mm.
experimentation, maybe looking at Copilot. But what I'm not seeing is really clear strategic paths among the masses that seem to be being followed.
Yeah.
So I'm curious from your perspective, like, where
Hmm.
are you seeing kind of the same distribution or a little different?
Yeah, very much so. And I think one significant difference, and it's not minor at all, from 5 or 10 years ago, back when innovation was still such a novelty that an organization I was working with, the College of Law Practice and Management, had an award specifically about innovation, right? To say, yay, a law firm or a legal entity did something innovative. And now I don't think we need to make as much of a deal about that. So I think the firms that maybe were like bleeding edge back then are now the leading edge. But you're right. We still have this kind of Rogers diffusion curve-ish thing where it's still taking a lot of time for that mass of firms in that bell shape in the middle to really cotton on to all this. And in a lot of respects, it's understandable, and not just for the classic Richard Susskind, explanation of it's difficult to tell a room full of millionaires their business model is wrong, but also because there's no particular and there's two aspects of this. Number one, there's no particular market incentive for them right now to be going out and doing all kinds of different things. I mean, we talk about, and I will want to talk a little bit later on about pricing strategies. But when you talk to, as I'm sure you have, people in mid-sized and large firms about this, and as often as not, you'll hear them say something like, we floated this by our clients, and the clients don't want it. They would prefer the billable hour, not because they love it, but because it's the devil they know. Um, and also because, and I've heard this on a number of occasions, people with firms saying the clients don't want it because they think if we're pushing it on them, it means it's bad for them and good for the firm. So, and I said, like, "Ooh, okay, I think you don't have a pricing problem, you have a trust problem, but okay."
100%.
Um, and the other piece of it, in terms of the inability of a lot of firms to kind of move forward, I think is it's not just the external, it's the internal issues that are far more gripping. I find law firms are incredibly alive to internal pressures and internal signals and so forth, and very little from the market itself. This is consistent with my experience that lawyers are very inward looking, not very outward looking. But like I've been yapping off and on about AI for a couple of years now, but easily three-quarters of my engagements with law firms of all kinds over the last couple of years have not been about AI. It's been around associates and attrition and productivity and work from home and all this kind of stuff. And a common theme of we don't think we have we don't have enough engagement by our younger lawyers with this, and it's a problem and so forth. So, and that's not to say those aren't important issues. What I try to say to the firms is this is symptomatic of something bigger, which you need to take address. But I think for all those reasons, I think it's just so difficult for firms to really respond to anything other than truly macro level forces like a pandemic, right? Or like, as we'll probably see the next 5 years, a collapse of the billable hour regime, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm hoping that there's some awareness being built, and as you've suggested, at least some preliminary framework work being done internally. But we'll see, I guess.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. And you had written about a future lawyer starter kit, which I think is interesting. And
Yeah.
maybe you can talk a little bit about that and the human competencies. I had a recent experience with a bank. We're a early stage tech company, and we needed a credit facility, and we're a little different than most companies our size. Most companies have taken a bunch of VC money. They're lighting cash on fire, but they've got venture funds in their cap table, and banks like to loan with when there's a backstop. So
Yeah.
they know the VCs will step in if there's a situation. We don't really fall into that. We're mostly bootstrapped. TLTF gave us a little bit of money, but we're trying to go as long as we can in a capital efficient way.
Yeah.
Well, as I was out shopping around for banks, I had one bank in particular that asked me for all of this stuff, which is usually annoying, but the stuff that they asked for was really cool. They asked for our pitch deck. They asked for our business plan. They asked for a video of me delivering, explaining the pitch
Oh,
deck.
wow.
They really wanted to know us and our business. And I thought about all of I've been an entrepreneur for 32 years, and I've never had a law firm ask me for that. And when you think about the relationship and the importance of knowing your customer's business as someone who loans you money versus someone who helps you mitigate legal risks,
Hmm.
that's a much bigger need in the latter scenario. So,
Yeah.
it really, I think the industry has been largely reactive, largely kept clients at arm's length.
Oh, yeah.
And there hasn't been like that proactive engagement and even willingness to turn off the billing clock and get
Mm,
to know me a little bit as a client.
yeah.
And I really think that all the all of the human competencies that you listed out
Hmm.
help align with that. And there's been a little bit of a deficit of that, I feel like,
Oh,
historically.
yeah. Oh, I think massively. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that was when I was writing about that topic, I was really trying to identify, given that we are very likely on the cusp of a technology that is going to be able to replicate a lot of what you might call our cognitive or our documentary or transactional tasks, and skills and aspects and so forth, that those are going to become less important to us because now we have, if you will, competition for that. And the possibility that any given lawyer is going to be competitive for that kind of work, if you will, is dwindling daily. And so I said, what's going to matter is your human skill, your human attributes and capacities. And yes, and that includes things like, how well do you communicate, and what's, do you have anything more than a sociopathic level of empathy, for instance, and so forth. But it even kind of goes beyond, and deeper than that. And something you mentioned about how, like, the bank is out there saying, we're interested, we want to get to know your business. And you will occasionally find this amongst law firms, and more often among individual lawyers. It's very rare to see it expressed as a corporate or an entity wide approach. But for me, I'm always about drilling down, digging into it, right? So let's say, for instance, I have a service provider that wants to get to know my business really well. Okay, why do they want to get to know my business, right? And of course, one potential answer to that, which I think is probably an accurate answer in a number of cases, is because they want to get work and money from us, and they have figured out the best way to do that is to show interest in the business itself. So it's, the classic, authenticity. If you can fake that, you got it made. Okay. But I think that what's going to be a more lasting and a more effective approach to take to it is, when you're asked a question, and why do you want to know this stuff? Because then you can say, as a lawyer or the kind of service provider, because I'm actually really interested, because I want you to do well, I want your business to succeed, I'm interested in what you've got to offer. And I think that kind of thing is important, because one of the things that you as a founder understand this, and anybody who runs a business or has founded a business, you care about your business desperately. It's incredibly important to you. It's meaningful to you. It matters in your heart, not just in your brain or in your pocketbook, or wherever. It actually really matters. And you welcome people, whether they are investors or employees or supporters, whatever, who share that, who say, I believe in the mission that you have. You've just explained your mission to me. You've explained what you want to accomplish. Yeah, I want to accomplish that too. Right. And if I were to come across a lawyer who said, yeah, I believe in what you're doing and I want to be part of that, they got my business, right there off the part, because they've made that genuine connection. Right. And going back to, you can't, if you fake authenticity, I just don't see the point in that. And this is why one of my statements to lawyers is, you're going to be more selective about your clients, because you're not going to care that much about all of your clients, right? And some of them don't want to be cared about. That's fine. I don't think Citibank cares too much if we have a genuine belief in their desire to achieve whatever their corporate mission is. But for the rest of the world, for the real world, I think it really matters. And to your point about lawyers keeping clients at arm's length, keeping people at arm's length, that is absolutely built into this profession. Number one, I think we self-select for it. I think a lot of us went to law school because we were smart, we didn't like the sight of blood, and we didn't want to have to do math on a daily basis. So into law school we go. Okay. But you've seen all those studies, I'm sure. That and the dude's name is Richard. Will come back. Dr. Larry Richard
Yeah.
has done all these studies to talk about how lawyers are like extraordinarily below the mean in terms of things like empathy
Resilience.
and resilience and sociability and so forth. And part of it is in law school, we were trained that way. I remember distinctly being told by multiple professors in the context of client relations. Now, the one thing is not to become a dupe of your client. Don't let your client fool you. Don't get drawn in. Don't get pulled in. Keep professional, keep your distance. And it's like, that's a pretty miserable way to conduct yourself as a professional. So we've got a lot of bad work to undo as a profession in a very short period of time, and not everyone's going to figure it out. But my hope is that that message can get out to enough people that they will trust themselves and know themselves well enough to be able to make that kind of commitment to say, it's got to matter to me more than just in my head and more than just in the wallet. It's got to matter to me in the heart as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Is showing genuine interest, and I think that genuine interest also serves the client because lawyers are really focused on the risk side of the equation. Every business decision is a risk reward trade off.
Yeah.
And when I go to legal counsel and I say, hey, I have a resource that I want to hire from another company, he or she has a non compete. I don't want to just hear what I can't do. I want to hear what I can do. And if you know my business and you understand how important this role may be to my business and or this person,
Mm-hmm.
you're in a better position to help me navigate my way through this risk reward balancing exercise.
Yeah.
So I really think that because over the years I've had my wife and I own 5 gyms here in St. Louis, and we move one, so we've done 6 commercial leases,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a really miserable exercise negotiating that with landlords.
I'll
Um,
bet.
and then when you get lawyers involved, it's even worse
Mm.
because you have lawyers on both sides that are becomes a tug of war on semantics and horse trading. And instead of stepping back and say, what are we trying to accomplish here? This
Yes.
landlord wants this tenant in the building. This tenant wants to do business here. Let's find a way to get that done.
Yeah.
And I feel like as a consumer of legal services, understanding me and my goals will help you as a lawyer help me reach those goals more effectively.
Yeah, no question. And just two quick things on that. Yeah, so much of lawyer involvement, like you sort of said, when the lawyers are involved, it makes it worse. And I said, oh, there's an evergreen statement if ever I heard one. But so much of it is CYA. So much of it is I'm going to raise all these risks for you, if only because when or if something goes wrong, I don't want you to blame me for it. I don't want you to sue me for it. I don't want to get in trouble for this. So I'll flag these and I'll say, well, it's up to you. If you want to take on this risk, that's your business, right? Which is incredibly unhelpful. But also, and I think this again goes to this idea of having a genuine interest in the business and in the people involved with it. If you have that kind of relationship with the client entity, then your advice is not going to be about covering your ass. Your advice is going to be about, well, this is what I think is best for the business, right? And sometimes you have to give advice as a lawyer to your client that is not what they want to hear. I would say maybe more than sometimes. There's that classic, I think it's Learned Hand, who said half the business of a good lawyer is telling his client is a damn fool and should stop. And you gotta, but you can't say that unless you've established that rapport and that level of trust and reliability and effectiveness. But once you do, then you are knitted in, and you talk about unbreakable client relationships, right? No one's going to come along and take that client relationship from you because it is a solid, as my mother would say, as solid as the church. It's not going anywhere. So yeah, this is where I keep encouraging lawyers to migrate. I think it takes a lot of courage, but I think it is absolutely essential.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps, it helps understanding the reward side of the equation. You as my legal counsel can help me navigate the best trade-off of risk and reward if you understand both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
And you talk about a client first law firm model, which this is a good segue into,
Mhm.
and centering operations around client needs rather than lawyer convenience. Can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that?
Yeah, and that phrase was like the subtitle of a book I wrote back in 2017 called "Law is a Buyer's Market." Uh, a bit of an aspirational title. I do think, as with many things I say, I don't think I was wrong, but I do think I was a bit early. Um, but building a client first law firm was the subtitle. Now, what's interesting is a few years later, I was asked to write the foreword for another book, and this was written by Jack Newton, who was the CEO of Clio, and he called his book "The Client-Centered Law Firm," and we're very friendly. So I was happy for him to do this. He kind of took friendly issue with client first. He said you can't put the client first because there's all kinds of good reasons why. That's a short road to disaster for you, for your wellness, for your firm, etc. It's not about putting the client first. It's about putting the client at the center of what you do and the core of what you do. And I thought, and that was, as they say in court, that was a friendly amendment I was happy to accept. Um, but I think the overall point is very much the same, and reflects back to that a point I raised earlier about how law firms are so internally focused. All of the sensors, or most of the sensors, are internal. Very few of them are turned out to the rest of the world, and the ability to make that transition where you are paying more and more attention, you're more alert to, you are more sensitive to, monitoring and paying attention to and understanding what's going on in the world. And that, I mean, like I wrote a piece a couple of months back at my Substack about the idea that every law firm these days, with the world being absolutely on fire, you need to have people in your firm whose job it is to geopolitically monitor the world. And this applies to you. Not just, you don't have to be like an international conglomerate law firm with 1,000 lawyers. I gave the example of, you could be a law firm in a sleepy little town in Florida. And you do a lot of work with the local tourist trade. And if you're not paying attention to the fact that Canadian tourism has dropped 70% to the US since Donald Trump began talking about us as the 51st state, your clients are going to be caught absolutely dead, dead to rights. So you've got to have that awareness. And that's just one dimension, right? But that awareness of what's going on with your clients, with their business, with the world. And honestly, that's where we should be, right? It bothers me so much that we have kind of wandered. What's the old saying? He wandered away and left his mouth running. I think I do that a fair bit, but the profession's kind of wandered off from where it ought to have been, and it's wound up in the place where we are such navel gazers, and we are so focused on what we're doing. And something that I say on a regular basis when I'm giving presentations, and I said, I have not yet come across a law firm anywhere in the world that does not track down to the last hour every amount of billable time that its clients, that is what those lawyers have done for its clients. How much was done? Was it billed out? Was it collected? How much? To what extent? To whom do we give the credit? Blah, 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 blah. It's down to a science. I said, I have yet to come across a law firm that it maintains. Actually, that's not even true. I've come across a couple of small firms recently that have done this. I think one of them said they did it because of me, which is great. Um, a spreadsheet with 4 columns. What did the client ask for? What did they end up getting? Because those two things are often very different. What was the overall cost and the final bill to the client? And what did they think about their whole experience? And that fourth column is the absolutely essential one. What did your clients think about what you did for them? And so many lawyers, if you ask that about your last 10 client engagements, what did your client think about it? How do they feel about it? And how do you know? And I think a lot of them would be very hard pressed to give a good answer to that for even half of them. So yeah, that's what it means to be client centric, client focused, just outward focused, externally centered. It's much better out there in the world than it is in here. you know.
Yeah, it's almost like when I look at law. So I spent a few years in financial services at Bank of
Mm,
America, and I was on the risk management in the risk management world for most of that time. I
Mhm.
did 3 years in global treasury. The rest were in consumer risk, corporate audit. I was an internal auditor for anti-money laundering
Mm.
compliance, and then regulatory relations. And I got to see what a mature
Mhm.
risk governance organization and structure looks like. And it just doesn't exist in law firms. Like customer success, like when you were talking about those outward measures and how are our clients, do they enjoy working with us, are we
Mm.
delivering the outcomes they expect? I immediately think oh, that's customer success. There's no customer success in legal services and law firms. There's no risk management, there's no internal audit. It's such a different beast. And I don't know if you remember, but during the talk i had I had mentioned how the big four now entering in
Mm.
Arizona and
Yeah.
KPMG, and I went through all of their resources and capabilities, like 4,000 lawyers, 40 billion in revenue, 275,000 employees. Innovation is in their culture and in their DNA.
Yeah.
Legions of Six Sigma black belts and Gen AI experts, and like they're setting up shop over there to compete with you.
Yeah.
Who do we think is more better positioned to capitalize on this next iteration? Because where the means of legal production have really changed.
Mhm.
Who do we think is really better positioned now? There's lots of caveats and you can make lots of arguments about different aspects of that, but it's really hard to argue that an organization like KPMG, which is the smallest of the big four, right?
Mhm.
Deloitte's twice their size at 80 billion,
Yeah.
where the biggest law firm in the world is like 7.5 billion, right? So from a
Yeah.
resources perspective, as we get into an era where R&D is going to become part of the equation, because buying, there's no differentiation if I go buy Harvey and Co-Counsel or Paxton or Legora, and my
Mhm.
competitor can do the same thing down the street. So I don't know. What do you see in terms of how law firms in this next, I like to call it 2.0, in this
Mhm.
2.0 big law world, how are firms going to differentiate themselves?
It's a really good question. It's a really tough question. And one of the reasons it's tough is that more and more these days, the answer I am inclined to give, and I don't often give it because, for obvious reasons, is it might not matter
Hmm.
a little bit. I mean, we've just spent like a good 20, 30 minutes, going through any number of the drawbacks and failings and shortcomings and problems within large law firms, which are chronic, right? They've been around since I began poking my head into this area in earnest back around 2003 or four. um, and they've been around for quite some time. And one of the reasons that firms, going back to that, why don't firms shift out of this stuff? Because firms are large law firms. I'll use them as specific, although you could apply this to pretty much any size. Large law firms are incredibly poorly run businesses. They are not capitalized. They don't have any, hardly at all, permanent assets. All the assets of value, as the saying goes, walk out every night. Increasingly, they get poached by other firms, and you have to lead them out. They are self-absorbed. They're self-interested. They have their entire pricing system is 100% risk placed on the client. They're miserable businesses, and yet here we are. What's the average profit of the 100th firm in the AmLaw 100? Is it like 800 grand a year, 900 grand a year, maybe more than that at some point?
That's
I
about
don't
right.
know,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, so you're in a position where these firms say it doesn't matter that we're bad businesses. It doesn't matter that we're not actually any good at this, because for whatever reason, we are just set up to make money, and we're just going to keep on doing it year after year. We're not differentiated from our competitors. Doesn't matter. We don't pay attention to client service. It doesn't matter. And this is what I've come across. And I've done some consulting with firms. I've worked with consulting firms, and any number of conversations I have with veteran consultants in this industry. And so many of them come down to the end of the day to saying, you know what, it doesn't actually matter how great a strategy you give them or what a great insight, what have you. They're just going to keep on doing what they've always done, right? It's one of the reasons why a number of people who've been at this, like, I don't do a lot of consulting for law firms of any particular size, and from what I've just said, you can probably see why. But part of it is the people I know who have, they get kind of jaded. They get kind of, sure, what the hell? Yeah, here's a strategy for you. Go nuts. I hope it enjoys its time on the shelf. That's not going to happen. So, so I look at all that, and I look at AI coming in, and I look at a technology that, well, take a look at the Thomson Reuters Future of the Law Firm report, came out a few months back, where they said, we foresee over the course of the next 5 to 10 years a decline of 40% in the number of billable hours that will be required to carry out legal work, and for routine, highly repeatable work, it's closer to 80%. And it's like, I'm sorry, that's an extinction level event. You cannot collapse inventory like that dramatically in that short a space of time and not have catastrophic consequences. So yeah, and I'm very bearish on the ability of even well-run firms with a strong central culture and general consensus amongst the ownership about what to do. I'm bearish that they can handle what's coming. I look at the larger firms and I just think, well, if the regulations were to change tomorrow and I could buy shares in your law firm, I would choose to bypass that opportunity. So that's a heavy statement that I'm making here, and it's a heavy declaration. But it's very difficult for me to see in realistic terms. Is it theoretically possible that you could do this? Absolutely. You can come up with a strategy. You can write books on the prospect of how to make your law firm, to make the transition to the new kind of world. But in practical terms, the way most law firms are set up, the way the how where power is localized within the firms, how power is exercised, how privilege is maintained, and I don't mean evidentiary privilege. I mean the censor privilege. The fact that, as someone pointed out to me years ago, and I don't know why I didn't ever notice this myself, there is not 1 ounce of quality control in law firms at the partner level, right? A partner can serve their client, and it's their client, by the way, not the firm's client, serve their client with something, and nobody else in the firm ever so much as glances at it. And if you suggested to that partner, maybe Bob or Barbara, whatever, should take a look at that just to make sure and give you some feedback, they'd be out the door the next day. So this is a little bit of my own frustration with law firms coming through over this time, but I am bearish on the prospects, if I'm being absolutely honest with you.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And, that's, we are solely dependent on law firms. I mean, we have 100% law firm business. So it has my eyes open, and I've
Yeah.
been trying to play out different scenarios in my head, almost like a Monte Carlo simulation, like, okay,
Mm,
if this, then that. And what I keep running into the concept of consolidation.
yeah.
So the AmLaw 100 is extremely fragmented. Again, listeners are familiar with the stat that if you add up the revenues of all 100 firms, it's 140 billion. If you add up the revenues of the big four, it's about 220 billion,
Yeah.
right? So extremely fragmented. The largest 5 players in the space own about 4% of the market. On the accounting side, public accounting side, this is on audit. The top 4 own 97% of the Fortune 500. So very, very different dynamics. And I keep thinking, okay, what has driven the fragmentation that exists in big law today? And I think it's what you just described. They're not really well run businesses. A lot of times they've been, they've grown organically with some acquisition in here and there, with maybe some opportunistic, not necessarily a corporate development strategy, but
Hmm.
oh, this firm across the street is sucking wind, let's swoop in and
Yeah.
get them at a fire sale price. So when I think about, all right, there's going to be somebody's going to figure it out how to do this, and the ones that do, I think it's going to be a much smaller number, and I think there's going to be buying opportunities and consolidation. I don't know. Does that fit with
Mhm.
how you see things playing out?
Yeah, oh, for sure. I can absolutely see a wave of consolidation. A friend of mine in the business coined a term which I won't be able to pull together at the moment, but the idea of they look like mergers, but they're actually just wind downs
Mhm.
of a firm. You know, like firm A will acquire firm B. Oh, it's a merger. No, because firm B's name is disappearing and only about a third of the lawyers are joining the new firm. No, this is a harvest
Mhm.
of firm B. And you know, and the only negotiations really are around things like unfunded pension liabilities and who's going to pay for those sorts of things. And I can see lots more of that. I think we're going to see consolidation in two respects. One, a lot of firms are going to uh, be the victims of what you call coyote gravity. You know, the coyote runs off the cliff, and it takes him a few seconds. He looks down and says, "Oh, you know," sign comes out, off it goes, ears follow. So it's going to be part of it, but part of it also is going to be um, again, it's difficult for me to look at the advance of AI and where it's come already in 2 years and think about where it's going to be in five and imagine that law firms are going to have anywhere close to the same number of lawyers that they do today, especially non-equity partners and associates. I would not be the least bit surprised to see a pretty significant culling of lawyers in those positions, and there's not going to be any obvious place for them to go other than into their own individual businesses. So the firms there'll be consolidation in terms of firms are kind of glommed together a little bit, but also as they shrink and become more compressed. Now, that's not to say the firms will become less profitable. You can make an argument, and I think there's a good one to be made, that the winners in all this are going to be insanely profitable, right? Because profit again belongs to the owners. And if you're lucky enough to be a current owner of one of these law firms, and you're in that sweet spot of your career, you can probably make bank off this whole process. But it's one of those things where it's a short term crystallization of value that is going to massively reduce the population of law firms, I suspect, or at least firms as we understand them now. Not to say that new firms won't emerge, and I think new firms can and will emerge. And in a way, I think they kind of have to, because this is the thing. Every so often, when like a firm collapses or disappears, whatever, and the legal press writes it, oh, the death of a law firm, and I'm like, I'm sorry, law firms aren't people. Nobody died, right? You know, yeah, a grand old brand disappeared. Okay, well, I guess I can shed a tear for that, nostalgia, but businesses that aren't working are supposed to go down. They're supposed to fall apart, and then labor disperses because that's what happens. Labor disperses. People go out and they amalgamate in different combinations in models and in structures that make more sense for the market in which we have now. So I think there is going to be a massive downscaling of the number of law firms. I think the concept of an AMLA 100 itself is relatively shortly going to be very dated, but I think we will see new entities establish themselves, and I don't think they're going to be huge entities. They don't have to be. They probably shouldn't be, because again, this idea of chasing growth by adding lawyers is actually pretty stupid. And you're going to see them reconstitute in new combinations where your inventory is not the time and effort of your lawyers. It is in the value you're producing, or the relationships you're establishing, or in the percentage of the value that your client is generating through your work, whatever the case might be. So for me, I see a kind of a grand reconstitutioning. I don't know if that's a word or not, but if it's not, it maybe it should be. That's where I think we're going to go. Old models, old systems and structures falling away because they don't work anymore. New models emerging that are better adapted to the environment in which we'll find ourselves.
That makes perfect sense to me. Well, we're almost out of time, but I did want to touch on one last subject that I think
Mhm.
you have some interesting thoughts around, and that is pricing.
Mm,
and what pricing might look like in a post AI world. It's really a tricky problem, and I've heard
yeah.
lots of interesting ideas put forward, but I've not really heard anything that just goes, "Oh,
Mm,
that makes sense." It's
yeah.
I haven't heard it yet. I don't know. What are your thoughts on how what pricing might look like in the
Yeah.
future?
Yeah. So a few thoughts. First of all, pricing period is difficult in any industry, in any area. It's really, really difficult to figure out what the right price is. Most of the time, we have mostly reliable, objective market dynamics to guide us. We can say, well, the market will decide what the price for plasma TVs is. The market will decide what the price for SUVs is. Okay, that's great. If you have a functioning marketplace, which is to say a relatively informed a buying population and a very diversified and highly inter-competitive set of suppliers, and no real information asymmetry, then okay, you've got yourself a normal market. We don't have any of that.
An efficient market, right?
Yeah, exactly. In,
Yeah.
in in like literal economic terms, we don't have any of that in the law, right? So pricing is hard enough in an efficient market. It's almost impossible in a market like legal services, where for the most part, unless you are in a litigation with a very specific dollar amount attached, unless you were involved in a merger or some other operation where there's a very specific dollar amount in terms of this is the total value that this thing will be worth, or the case might be. And sometimes that happens, a lot of times it doesn't. Uncertainty is the norm. It's by a wide margin. Then there's no obvious dollar amount you can hang on to and do something like, oh, we'll throw a percentage onto it, right? So then you're in a position of, okay, well, then what's the value? And here's the thing, and this is the reason why the billable hour has been as effective as long as it has. A big reason is because it's really profitable for lawyers. But the other is that nobody knows the value of what we do as lawyers. There is no obvious way to say what it's worth, right? How much is it worth for me to help your business get set up? I don't know. If the business fails in the first week, not very much. If the business goes on to become Google, it was worth quite a lot. But you won't know that, right? There's no way to know it at the time. How much is good advice worth? It could be invaluable, right? If it's not listened to, well, what's the impact over there? So, so we don't know the value of what we're selling, and our clients, for the most part, don't know the value of what we're buying. So, of course, we kind of default to this proxy of, the hell, this many dollars per hour, and we'll bill you for the time that we spend doing it. Because you know what? We don't have a better idea. You don't have a better idea, client. Let's go ahead with this. And the client doesn't love it, but it says, all right, at least I get it. It's simple, it's straightforward, and I can live with that. Okay. So that's why. I mean, like, I think the billable hour has a number of drawbacks as a pricing mechanism, but it's workable. I think it is toxic as a compensation advancement and internal value assessment metric, which is where the real problem exists. We don't have time for that today. But I will say this again, along comes this technology, which is a massive compressor of time. And what it's going to mean as it gets adopted more and more, not just within law firms, but especially within clients, especially on the corporate side, you're going to see a lot of work, a lot of tasks are either going to be fully automated entirely by the AI. That won't be that common at the start. Maybe in 5 years, we'll see. We don't know. We don't know enough about how AI is going to develop, but that is certainly a reasonable possibility. But it's either entirely automated or at least massively accelerated. If you're in a position where you are still selling your work according to the time and effort that lawyers put in to produce it, you're going to be out of business within a few years' time, because your inventory is going to collapse, right? And you're going to find yourself going around saying, how do we get more hours? How do I get more time? Let's go out and get more work from the clients. Okay. But as you know, there's a lot of unrecoverable costs associated with that. Your marketing and your calling and your meeting people and your networking and all this kind of stuff. And it takes a long time to land work from a client, because either the client is brand new to the world, in which case great, or the client already has a lawyer and it can be very hard to pry someone else away from their legal counsel. And even if you do get this new client or this new work, it comes in and a lot of that's going to be susceptible to the AI. So the hours, you're going to find yourself on this treadmill running faster and faster and faster, as long as you believe that what you are selling your clients is time and effort. And you were never selling that really. You were always selling outcomes and experiences and peace of mind, but you weren't pricing according to that. So the way I look at it is that what are we going to be valued for in future as lawyers? To the extent we exist, to the extent there is any demand for us, hope to God there is, but it's going to be about what kind of relationships, of reliable, sincere relationships of effectiveness have we established with our clients? If you've got one of those, if you've got several of those, you can charge whatever the hell you want for that, because that's incredibly valuable to clients. Just like that bank that said, we care enough about you to make this effort. You will pay as much as is necessary, as much as you can, to get that kind of asset. It's got to be about the relationship, because fundamentally, that's what it means to be a lawyer. To be a lawyer means to be in relationship with someone who you are giving guidance to based on your knowledge of the law, based on your professional responsibility and ethics and your personal integrity, that they are relying on you for help. And that is at the heart of what we do as lawyers. You might as well make that the basis of your pricing mechanism.
That is great feedback. Yeah, I love this topic because it's not there are no easy answers, and
No.
the billable hour was an easy answer. It's a low
Yeah.
risk answer. It's a logical answer. But looking forward, none of those easy, low risk, logical answers exist, and
No.
I find that exciting because
Yeah.
it's a Rubik's cube. We get to figure this thing out. So
well, if you can figure it out, you can buy your own Caribbean island.
yeah,
because yeah, that's going to be it's the question. But you're absolutely right, and that is not just in pricing. Across the board, all the easy answers are gone.
yeah,
We're out of that time. We're no longer in high school, right? We're going immediately into master's level, PhD level university as an industry, and wow, it's going to be a hell of a leap.
yeah. It's going to be fun. Like I said, I've never been more excited. I know I like you, I point out a lot of the challenges and the obstacles in front of us, but it's not because I'm pessimistic. I just want to make sure there's awareness and not complacency around them, because I'm married to this industry. My livelihood depends on it. I want to see it succeed. So yeah, this has been a great conversation. How can people, I've been reading your work for a long time, but how can people find out more about what you write and where you speak?
Thanks, Ted. Almost everything that I'm writing these days is at my Substack, which is just my name, Jordan Furlong. I try to get something out every couple of weeks. The summer, I'm busy with a bunch of projects. I've been writing as much now. Every couple of weeks, I'll try to publish something. It's free because two reasons. One, I want the information to spread. I'm actually most interested in the ideas getting out there and circulating. But also, I don't make my money off what I write. I make my money off people reading what I write and say, that's great. Can we pay you a lot of money to come and talk to us as a firm? And I said, awesome, about that. I'm moving into doing more strategic consulting with firms that are interested in it. Right now, there's a very, very small universe of law firms of any kind interested in that kind of guidance, but I suspect it's going to increase over the course of time.
Yeah, and Furlong is spelled Furlong.
That is correct.
We're recording here on video. Most of our engagement comes it's audio, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but we do have we get quite a few YouTube views as well. Well, it was
Glad I wore a jacket.
Yeah, there you go. It was I always have my Infodash shirt on, a little free advertising. Well, it was great having you on. I really appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we'll get to chat again at a conference real soon. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content.